Crash Bandicoot is a classic Sony staple and a favorite character of many gamers growing up in the 90s, including myself. We're huge fans of the original games here, as well as the newer, cleaned up Insane trilogy, so we decided to take a look deep into Crash's history to bring you 10 facts about Crash Bandicoot you probably didn't know. Starting off at number 10, you may not have known this, but Crash Bandicoot's appearance was actually changed for Japan. After the nice successful launch of the original Crash in the United States, Sony still wasn't quite confident that Crash would work as a release in Japan, simply just because Crash is just so distinctly American. So Naughty Dog took Crash and put him through a few changes. He needed 5 fingers in Japan because cartoon characters with 3 or 4 fingers weren't really as popular there, as well as making Crash and his face a bit more, quote, cuter and softer, and also stretchy and more rubbery and cartoony. They had to remove certain death animations too, as well as that whole end of level thing where they count down all the crates you missed. Well, apparently that was too terrifying to Japanese children, so they had to cut that. As well as lessening some of the edginess of some of the background music here and there. You know, the core experience is still mostly similar, but just some iconic things that we expect aren't quite the same for other territories. But at number 9, speaking of smashing crates, that was actually a last-minute design choice. The game was in an alpha state, and Naughty Dog was planning to show small amounts behind closed doors at CES when Naughty Dog leads Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin actually realized something was just missing with the game. You're running around, jumping and hitting stuff, but what else? What else is there? Between jumps and enemies, what would you do in that empty space? They thought it almost felt a little boring and something was missing, so overnight they hung out and came up with the concept of smashing crates. Jason drew the art and Andy programmed the crate behaviors, and 2 days later they were up and running in the game. For a feature that they were just kind of winging it with, it worked out pretty nicely, seeing as now it's the most iconic aspects of Crash Bandicoot. But moving on to number 8, Crash Bandicoot basically lived 2 lives as mascots for very different things. Crash was, of course, for a long time sort of the unofficial mascot of PlayStation in the late 90s. But eventually, after Crash Bandicoot moved on from Naughty Dog and was made into a few smaller spin-off games like Twin Sanity and Crash of the Titans, he was still popular, but nowhere near as he once was for a lot of people. So in conjunction with the release of Crash of the Titans in 2007, Sierra and Vivendi announced a partnership with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, signing on Crash himself to serve as kind of like a national champion of the society's school and youth awareness programs. To get kids more interested in the programs, posters using Crash's images were intended to promote awareness with phrases like, "Crash is in on the fight against leukemia, are you?" I guess it turns out Crash Bandicoot really hates leukemia. But at number 7, Crash Bandicoot's theme was actually made by a music legend. Mark Mothersbaugh, the keyboardist and lead singer of the 80s pop band Devo, is partly responsible for the iconic Crash Bandicoot themes. Not only was he responsible for the iconic Crash sounds, but he was also behind the Rugrats theme and soundtracks, which is cool. Through his production company, Mutato Musica, Mark Mothersbaugh provided oversight and additions, and his colleague Josh Mansell composed the music for Crash on a level-by-level basis, like using mock-ups and art of the levels and tapes of playthroughs of the levels from Naughty Dog, and I think it's safe to say that they did a pretty damn good job, right? But at number 6, in the early days of the creation of Crash, Naughty Dog wanted a mascot like Sonic the Hedgehog or the Tasmanian Devil and originally settled on a wombat. Their financiers at Universal Interactive apparently sent along a bunch of test placeholder names like Wezzy, Wuzzles, and Wally, and Naughty Dog ended up just settling for Willy the Wombat as character designs move forward. Once Crash Bandicoot as we actually know him started to formulate between the founders Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin and a few artists, Universal pushed to finalize Willy the Wombat as the name, and Naughty Dog pushed back, ultimately promising to drop out of the game entirely unless they could call him Crash Bandicoot. Wally to them was just too family-friendly and pedestrian. They ultimately got their way, and thank God, because I mean, Willy the Wombat just sounds way too bland and basic. Who knows, maybe people wouldn't have even cared as much. Names are very important. But at number 5, did you know that there were a few levels that got cut from the first Crash game? There were 5, actually, that got cut. There was a cliff level located on Insanity Island, and that just seems like a plain old Crash level. There was a waterfall level, a cavern level where you were running around in a cave full of acid. It was also one of the shortest levels in the game, but that's probably just because it wasn't finished. Then there was going to be a lava level. This one was cut because the lava clashed with the color of Crash. It forced way too many polygons on screen, and it made the game a bit of a mess. But some of that lava did make it into the Koala Kong boss battle. That's actually some of the same stuff carried over. Then there's the big one, Stormy Ascent. Out of all of the cut levels, this one was the closest to being finished, and it wasn't included because of its extreme difficulty, and also because Naughty Dog couldn't fix all the bugs in time before shipping it, so they just cut it. But if you were crafty back in the day and you had access to a Game Shark when Crash 1 was out, you were actually able to access and play this level. And also recently, this level was added to the Insane trilogy as a DLC pack for free, and I gotta say, the level hasn't really gotten any easier. But at number 4, Crash Bandicoot actually beat out Twisted Metal. Just a handful of weeks before E3 1996, Sony had signed a deal with Universal, Naughty Dog, and Crash. Crash was to make its big, public, playable debut at that E3, and Sony had huge booth presentation plans for Twisted Metal, which they then promptly kicked to the curb to make room for Crash. According to sources there, the giant former Twisted Metal booth was located directly across from Nintendo and Mario, so it was basically Mario and Crash head-to-head. Shigeru Miyamoto even strolled over to check out Crash for himself. Sorry Twisted Metal missed its big moment, but at least it survived. But at number 3, back in 1997, before the release of Crash Bandicoot 2, it was actually the first game to be fully QA tested in one of the modern ways. It has been coined the Sony method, but I've also heard it called some other things. Basically, Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back was the first game to be played from beginning to end with test audiences. Random QA people were placed in cubicles and then were observed playing through the entirety of the game. In a talk at the Computer History Museum, famed game maker Mark Cerny, then producer of Sony games including Crash Bandicoot, described the process being unique and unheard of at the time. Developers were always in rooms making games for themselves, and Sony thought it was necessary to have people actually test it from beginning to end, not just in smaller chunks and classic-style focus groups. He actually even called up legend Shuhei Yoshida and made it happen way back when, and now most companies rely on this testing process to release games all the time. But at number 2, back in 1996, once Sony knew they were going to publish Crash, they analyzed the game up and down with their tech, and they were totally freaked out to see that the game was constantly loading data from the CD at 300 kilobytes a second. All the testing that they did on the PS1 hardware before releasing it, to make sure that nothing would break and all that, well, the estimates for the actual disk drives only accounted for drives that occasionally access data on the disk, which was how most games worked back then. They hadn't planned for the PS1 to use games that used the disk drive reader in a way that would constantly use it and constantly load data, and Sony was legit worried that since their PS1s weren't tested for this type of use, that all PS1s out in the world would start breaking because their CD drives would melt. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and then more and more games started to adapt that same type of process in terms of loading the game, but it was pretty funny to think that Sony was not prepared for something like that. Maybe they just got lucky. But at number 1, the original Crash Bandicoot had an animated concept. This only recently surfaced in the last few years thanks to producer David Siller, who uploaded this old unused animated concept of Crash Bandicoot cutscenes that were animated just like a Saturday morning cartoon to be used in the game. They would serve as bookends, both setting up the intro of the game and the end of the game. It was produced by Universal Animation when they were at the top of the game at the time. And it's actually pretty awesome. It's very much like many other 90s cartoons at the time, like Pinky and the Brain, Tiny Toons, Freakazoid, stuff like that, but unfortunately it never went anywhere because apparently Sony really wanted to hammer home the PS1 as a 3D gaming device, and flat animated cutscenes in one of their flagship games just didn't really sell it the way they wanted it to. So all we have now are these unused cutscenes on YouTube, which are absolutely worth a watch if you're an older cartoon fan. You should go check them out. But those are some interesting facts about the Crash Bandicoot games that we thought you guys wanted to know. The game has a really rich history and a very interesting origin story that we thought you'd want to hear some things about. But we want to hear from you guys down in the comments. What are your favorite aspects of Crash? What's your favorite little hidden fact or Easter egg about Crash? And also, what's your favorite Crash Bandicoot game? We won't judge you if it's one of the newer ones. Okay, maybe we will just a little bit. But you know the deal. Thanks for watching, guys. Clicking the like button helps us out, and subscribing if you're new is also a very good idea because we put out stuff like this all the time. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.